The wizard Merlin stands beside a young king, pulling a sword from solid stone. This iconic image is a beautiful lie. The true story of Merlin is far stranger than the legend, a secret history buried by time and rewritten by poets. We are going on an investigation to uncover his real origins. You will learn the shocking truth about the man behind the myth, a truth hidden in ancient manuscripts and archaeological riddles. How did a mad prophet from the Welsh forests become the world's most famous wizard? And why was his original name considered too vulgar for a king's court? What do you really know about the wizard Merlin buried deep within ancient Welsh poetry? The very first Merlin appears, and he is nothing like the wizard we know. In a 10th century prophetic poem called Arms Prydein, we find a figure named Myrddin Wyllt. This is not a wise old man with a long white beard and a pointy hat. Myrddin Wyllt is a wild man, a madman of the woods driven insane by a terrible battle. Imagine a warrior who has seen such bloodshed and carnage that his mind simply shatters. He flees into the Caledonian Forest, living among the wolves and the trees, surviving on roots and berries. His power is not learned magic, but a raw, terrifying form of prophecy that comes to him in his madness. He speaks in riddles and screams truths about the future, his words echoing through the lonely forests. This is a far cry from the trusted advisor to King Arthur. The wild man Myrddin is a tragic, chaotic figure, a vessel for visions born from trauma, not a master of the mystical arts. He is a force of nature, not a servant of the court. Why was this haunting, primal figure transformed over the centuries into the polished Merlin of legend? The answer lies in a problem with a name, a linguistic quirk that made his original title unsuitable for a new audience. This transformation from a wild prophet to a courtly wizard began with a single, embarrassing word. The original Welsh name, Myrddin, carried a powerful and ancient heritage, but when Norman French poets encountered it, they heard something entirely different. To their ears, Myrddin sounded uncomfortably close to their own vulgar word for excrement, murd. Imagine the courtly poets of the time, trying to sing the praises of a great British sage to a French-speaking nobility, only to have his name provoke snickers every time it was spoken. This was a serious problem of public relations in the medieval world. A name that evoked filth was simply unacceptable for a character destined to become a noble advisor to kings. So they changed it. The scholars and storytellers of the 12th century Latinized Myrddin into Merlinus, a name that sounded scholarly, dignified, and most importantly, inoffensive to their patrons. From Merlinus, it was a short step to the Merlin we know today. This was not a simple translation. It was a deliberate act of cultural sanitization, a rebranding effort that stripped away the messy, wild, and potentially offensive roots of the character to make him palatable for a new, powerful audience. His very identity was reshaped by the political and social sensitivities of a conquering court. The wild man of the woods was being groomed for a life at the Round Table, and it all started by cleaning up his name. But a new name was only the beginning. To complete his transformation, Merlin needed a new past, one crafted by a single, ambitious writer with a grand political vision. This rebranded Merlin needed a grand stage for his debut, and he found it in the crumbling foundations of a tyrant's fortress. Our story shifts to a desperate king named Vortigern, a figure as real as the hills of Wales, though his legend has grown just as tall. According to the ancient historian Nennius, Vortigern was attempting to build a mighty tower on a hill, but each night the earth would shake and his work would collapse into rubble. His advisors, perhaps seeking a scapegoat, declared that the only way to stabilize the structure was to sprinkle its mortar with the blood of a fatherless boy. Soldiers scoured the land and finally found such a child, a youth named Ambrosius, who would later be known by another name. They brought this boy before the furious king, a child seemingly marked for death to serve a ruler's ambition. But the boy turned the tables completely. He did not plead for his life. Instead, he calmly explained that the king's wise men were fools. The problem was not a lack of sacrificial blood, but something living deep beneath the hill itself. He told Vortigern to dig, and there the workers discovered a hidden pool of water. And in that pool they found two dragons, one white and one red, who awoke and began a ferocious battle, filling the air with their fiery breath and terrible roars. As the beasts fought, the boy, this young Ambrosius, began to speak a prophecy. He revealed that the red dragon symbolized the native Britons, and the white dragon represented the invading Saxons. Their struggle beneath the hill mirrored the war tearing the land apart above. He foretold that the red dragon would eventually triumph, signaling a future victory for the British people. This was the moment Merlin, the prophet, was truly born in the written record, not as a wild man in the forest, but as a calm, divinely gifted child solving a royal crisis. The chaotic visions of Myrddin Wyllt were now being channeled into a clear political prophecy, one that served a very specific purpose. It gave a people besieged by invaders a promise of ultimate victory, a hope cemented not in stone but in a fantastic tale. The wild man had been brought to court, his madness refined into wisdom, his screams shaped into a reassuring national forecast. But this was only the first step in his long journey to becoming Arthur's mentor. Yet this powerful prophecy needed an author, a master storyteller, to weave these scattered threads into a single, unforgettable legend. That man was Geoffrey of Monmouth. In the 12th century, Geoffrey performed an act of pure literary alchemy. He took the raw, screaming prophet Myrddin Wyllt from the Welsh forests and fused him with the calm, prophetic boy Ambrosius from the Vortigern story. The result was a brand new character, a super prophet he named Merlin. Geoffrey did not just stumble upon this idea. He was a brilliant and ambitious writer with a clear political goal. His two major works, The Prophecies of Merlin and The History of the Kings of Britain, were designed for a specific audience, the new Norman rulers of England. These conquerors wanted a glorious history for the land they now controlled, a past filled with heroic kings and epic battles that rivaled the legends of France and Rome. Geoffrey gave it to them. He presented Merlin as the ultimate seer, a figure whose prophecies stretched far into the future, conveniently validating the Norman reign as the destined culmination of British history. Think of it as the ultimate medieval public relations campaign, with Merlin as the star spokesman. Geoffrey smoothed out the wild man's rough edges, channeling his chaotic visions into structured political predictions. The madman who lived with wolves was now the learned advisor who could command dragons and orchestrate the birth of a kingdom. This was not a simple collection of old tales. It was a deliberate, creative synthesis, a branding exercise that gave the Norman court a mythical past and gave the world the Merlin we recognize today. He transformed a collection of local folk heroes and tragic figures into a single, towering icon of wisdom and power. But even Geoffrey's masterful creation was not the final form of the wizard. His Merlin was still primarily a prophet and a political figure. The last crucial transformation, the one that gave him a pointed hat and a crystal ball, was yet to come, born from a rivalry between two of the Middle Ages' most imaginative writers. Geoffrey of Monmouth gave his new prophet an even more spectacular credential, one that connected Merlin directly to the most baffling ancient monument in Britain. According to Geoffrey's history, the massive stones of Stonehenge were not raised by anonymous ancient tribes, but by the magical engineering of Merlin himself. The story goes that the stones were originally in Ireland, part of a giant's ring, and they possessed powerful healing properties. King Aurelius, another of Geoffrey's legendary British rulers, wanted to erect a fitting memorial for nobles slain by the Saxons. His advisors told him of the miraculous Irish stones, and he sent an army to fetch them. The soldiers, however, were completely unable to move the colossal monoliths. Only Merlin, with his profound understanding of physics and the mystical arts, knew the secret. He dismantled the entire structure effortlessly with his ingenium, his clever devices, and had the stones shipped across the sea to Salisbury Plain, where they were reassembled exactly as they had stood. This was no simple feat of strength, it was an act of supreme magical engineering. Contrast this fantastical account with the archaeological reality. We now know the smaller blue stones were indeed transported from Wales, a land closely associated with Merlin's Celtic roots, over a distance of nearly 150 miles. The larger sarsen stones were dragged from much closer, but the entire project was a monumental effort of prehistoric logistics and social organization, taking generations to complete. So why would Geoffrey pin this achievement on his wizard? The answer is a masterstroke of political storytelling. By crediting Merlin with building Stonehenge, Geoffrey was anchoring his newly crafted British legend into the physical, ancient landscape. He was saying, look at our greatest, most mysterious national monument. It was not built by forgotten people, but by our greatest national prophet for our heroic kings. This act of imaginative archaeology gave his fictional history a tangible stone and earth foundation, making the entire narrative feel more real and deeply rooted in the land the Normans now ruled. The wild man from the forest was now the architect of Britain's most iconic site, his legend literally set in stone. But even this powerful image of a master engineer was not the final form of Merlin. One last transformation awaited, one that would trade his political prophecies for a crystal ball and a pointed hat, sealing his fate as the world's wizard. The polished prophet of Geoffrey's history still possessed one deeply unsettling secret, a story of origins so dark it threatened to unravel his entire noble image. This is the tale of Merlin's conception, a narrative that explains his power by tracing it to a truly demonic source. Medieval texts reveal that Merlin was not the son of an ordinary man. His mother was a virtuous princess, but his father was said to be an incubus, a malevolent spirit from hell that visits women in their sleep. This was not a blessing, it was a spiritual violation intended to breed an antichrist, a creature of evil who would walk the earth and corrupt mankind. The church saw this as a catastrophic event, the birth of a monster designed to use his powers for ruin. Yet the story takes a fascinating turn. Merlin was baptized at birth. This single act of faith, according to the legends, neutralized the inherent evil of his demonic ancestry. It did not strip him of his supernatural abilities, but it redirected them. The demonic power for chaos was sanctified, transformed into a tool for prophecy and wisdom. This left Merlin in a perpetual state of conflict, a man forever caught between two worlds. He was neither fully human nor fully demon, neither wholly saint nor entirely sinner. He was a living paradox, his great gifts a constant reminder of a terrifying inheritance. This internal struggle made him a profoundly compelling character for later writers. How could a man with a devil for a father become the primary architect of a Christian kingdom like Camelot? How could he be a force for good when his very existence was rooted in evil? This central, haunting question would shape Merlin's story for centuries, forcing storytellers to constantly redefine the nature of his power and the price he paid for it. This demonic inheritance forged a counselor unlike any other, a man whose power was perfect for shaping the destiny of a king. Merlin's greatest political masterstroke was the creation of Arthur himself, an act that began not with magic but with deception. He served other Pendragon, a king consumed by a forbidden passion for Igraine, the beautiful wife of his rival, the Duke of Cornwall. Others' army laid siege to the Duke's castle, but the walls were too strong. The king, burning with obsession, turned to his prophet for help. Merlin did not summon a storm or cast a lightning bolt. Instead, he used a far more subtle and potent magic, the magic of illusion. Using his arts, he transformed others' appearance completely, making him an exact duplicate of the Duke. Disguised as her husband, Arthur walked unchallenged through the enemy gates and into Igraine's chamber. From that union Arthur was conceived. This was not a clean or heroic beginning. It was an act of profound moral ambiguity, a foundational moment for a golden age built on a bed of trickery and betrayal. Yet it proved Merlin's ultimate point, that the ends could justify the most questionable means if they led to the birth of a legend. With Arthur born in secret, Merlin's next task was to reveal him to a kingdom tearing itself apart in a bloody civil war. After Arthur's death, there was no clear heir, and the most powerful lords fought bitterly for the empty throne. The solution appeared in the most unlikely of places, a churchyard in London. There, embedded in a great stone and an anvil, was a magnificent sword with an inscription proclaiming that whoever could pull it free was the true and rightful king. Countless knights and nobles tried and failed, their strength and pride useless against the enchanted metal. Then came the young Arthur, who was not even a knight but a mere squire fetching a sword for his foster brother. Needing a blade in a hurry, he innocently grasped the hilt and pulled the sword from the stone as if it were nothing. This was Merlin's true genius. The test was not one of strength or birthright, but of divine providence. It was a public miracle designed to bypass the petty politics of the warring nobles and place power directly into the hands of a boy chosen by destiny itself. The wizard had orchestrated the entire spectacle, creating a moment so pure and undeniable that it could unite a fractured nation. But a king with a magical sword was not enough to ensure lasting peace. Merlin knew that Arthur's greatest threat would not come from foreign armies, but from the ambition and jealousy of his own men. To solve this, the wizard presented Arthur with his most enduring symbol, the Round Table. This was not merely a piece of furniture, it was a revolutionary political idea. A round table has no head, no foot, no place of higher or lower honor. Every knight who sat there was an equal, his voice carrying the same weight as the king's. It was a physical declaration that they were a brotherhood, united in a common quest for justice, not a hierarchy of power where lords could squabble for precedence. Merlin populated this table with the greatest heroes of the age, men like Lancelot and Gawain, creating a fellowship that would become the stuff of legend. He understood that loyalty must be forged through shared ideals and mutual respect, not just through fear or obligation. The wizard who had once commanded dragons and moved mountains now built his most powerful enchantment, a simple, round piece of wood that held an entire kingdom together. Without Merlin's foresight, Arthur would have been just another warrior king, his reign a brief flash in a long history of conflict. The wizard was the architect, the prophet, and the engineer of Camelot itself, the invisible hand that guided a nation from chaos into a golden age that would never be forgotten. This grand legend, meticulously crafted by Geoffrey of Monmouth, could not be contained within the shores of Britain. It began a journey across Europe, carried by poets and scribes who each left their own mark on the wizard's ever-changing story. The first major step was taken by a Norman poet named Wace. Around the year 1155, Wace translated Geoffrey's Latin history into a vibrant French verse he called the Roman de Brut. This was more than a simple translation, it was an act of cultural popularization. Wace took Geoffrey's scholarly text and made it accessible and entertaining for the aristocratic courts of Europe, the very epicenters of fashion and storytelling. It was in Wace's version that we first hear a mention of the Round Table, an idea he presents as a clever solution to the squabbling among Arthur's knights. This single addition shows how the legend was already growing, becoming richer with each new telling. Wace was not just copying a story, he was building upon its foundation, adding new rooms to the castle of Camelot for future generations to explore. But the most profound transformation was yet to come from the pen of another French writer, Robert de Boron. Robert took the character of Merlin and placed him at the very center of a new cosmic drama, the quest for the Holy Grail. In his work, simply titled Merlin, Robert delved deep into the wizard's demonic parentage, but he gave it a startling new theological twist. he proposed that Merlin's birth was not merely an accident or an attack, but part of a divine countermove. God had allowed the incubus to father a child so that the resulting being, baptized and redeemed, would possess the power to outwit the forces of evil he was born from. Merlin's magic, in Robert's version, became a sacred tool. It was his prophecy that guided the knights toward the Grail, and it was his wisdom that helped establish the Round Table as a spiritual brotherhood, a Christian fellowship designed to guard the most sacred relic of all. Robert de Boron completed the wizard's journey from a wild forest prophet to a key architect in God's plan for Britain. This European journey changed everything. The madman of the Welsh woods was now a statesman, a prophet, and a holy man, his story rewritten to fit the religious and chivalric ideals of medieval Europe. But with his character now fully formed and his destiny intertwined with the Grail itself, a final, haunting question began to emerge. What becomes of such a powerful being, a man who can see every thread of fate? The legends suggest that his greatest strength, his foresight, ultimately led to his famous downfall. This power of foresight came with a dangerous ability to change his very form. In the early romances, Merlin's most spectacular magic was not moving mountains, but becoming someone else entirely. He was a master shapeshifter, a wizard who wore other faces as easily as a cloak. He could walk through a crowded market as a stooped old beggar, listening to the gossip of commoners. He could appear in a forest clearing as a magnificent, antlered stag, his animal eyes observing the progress of a lost knight. He even transformed into a young child to deliver a crucial piece of advice, his innocent guise disarming the most suspicious of lords. This was not magic for show, it was magic for control. Each transformation was a deliberate act of deception, a way to manipulate events from the shadows without ever revealing the guiding hand of the architect of Camelot. He became the ultimate trickster, a figure echoing ancient archetypes found in myths across the globe. Like the Norse god Loki or the Native American coyote, Merlin used cunning and illusion to bend the world to his will, often blurring the line between helpful guidance and mischievous meddling. His shapeshifting reveals a fundamental truth about his character. He was never truly the stern, bearded sage of later illustrations. At his core, he remained a being of fluid identity, the wild man of the woods who simply learned to wear civilization as his most effective disguise. This gift of foresight was a powerful political weapon, and the prophecies attributed to Merlin form a vast and bewildering collection. They speak of dragons fighting in the sky, of forests marching to war, and of kings who are boars and lions. On the surface, they seem like cryptic glimpses into a far future, but if you read them closely, a different pattern emerges. Many of these so-called predictions describe events that had already happened, written down long after the fact, and then cleverly attributed to the ancient wizard. This was a common and brilliant form of medieval propaganda. A ruler facing a challenge could have a scribe compose a new Merlin prophecy, a text that would suddenly be discovered in some old monastery. This document would then legitimize the king's claim to the throne by showing that Merlin himself had foreseen his reign centuries earlier. It was the ultimate endorsement, a seal of approval from destiny. The prophecies were also used as sharp political criticism. A writer wanting to attack a corrupt noble or a failed policy could do so safely by putting the words in Merlin's mouth, disguising contemporary satire as an ancient, inevitable prediction. The vague, symbolic language was the key to its longevity. A prophecy about a white dragon conquering a red dragon could be applied to the Saxon invasions in one century, and then reused to describe the Norman conquest in the next. It was a flexible tool, its meaning shifting to serve the needs of the present. So were these prophecies genuine glimpses of the future. For the most part, they were not. They were a literary device, a way to make modern political arguments sound like timeless, divine truth. The real magic was not in seeing the future, but in rewriting the past to control the present. Yet for all his power over kings and kingdoms, Merlin's fate was ultimately sealed not by a mighty foe, but by his own heart. This final chapter of his life introduces a figure of immense power and mystery, the Lady of the Lake. In many tales, she is known as Nimue or Viviane, a woman who began as Merlin's eager student. He saw in her a brilliant mind, a rare individual capable of understanding the deepest secrets of his art. He became her mentor, sharing the principles of magic and the patterns of prophecy. But this was never a simple teacher-student relationship. Merlin, for all his wisdom, was also a man, and he grew deeply, hopelessly infatuated with his beautiful pupil. His profound foresight became his personal curse because he could see the entire tragic path ahead with perfect clarity. He knew that teaching Nimue his final, most powerful enchantment would give her the very tool she would use to entrap him forever. He saw the ending and he walked toward it willingly. Imagine the torment of that choice, to look into the future and see your own destruction, and yet to be so captivated by love that you proceed anyway. This was the ultimate paradox of his demonic inheritance, his human heart leading him into a prison that his divine intellect could have easily avoided. Nimue, for her part, was a complex and ambitious figure. She learned everything Merlin had to teach, but she had no desire to remain in the shadow of the great wizard. She wanted her own power, her own autonomy. In the most famous version of the story, she used the very spell he taught her, a charm of magical confinement, to seal him within a hidden cave or a tower of invisible air. Some say it was an act of cold calculation, a way to be rid of her obsessive teacher. Others suggest it was an act of mercy, to protect the world from a being whose demonic nature might one day reawaken. And still others believe she did it to save herself, recognizing that his love was a form of possession from which she needed to escape. Whatever her motive, the result was the same. The architect of Camelot, the man who moved stones and made kings, was neutralized not by a sword, but by the one vulnerability his magic could never defend against: his own human longing. This final act completes the secret origin of Merlin. He began as a wild man of the woods, was refined into a political prophet, was sanctified into a holy architect, and was ultimately defeated by the very humanity he gained through his baptism. His story is a tapestry woven from madness, power, love, and a tragic flaw that echoes through the ages, a reminder that even the greatest seer cannot escape the destiny written in his own heart. Merlin's final enchantment is a paradox of his own making. He taught Nimue every secret he possessed, including the one spell that could ultimately contain him. She did not slay him with a sword or poison, for such mortal ends were beneath a being of his power. Instead, she wove a prison from the very fabric of his arts. In some tales, she lured him into a crystalline cave, and as he slept, she sealed the entrance with stones that no mortal hand could move. In others, she created a tower of invisible air, a beautiful, shimmering cage where he remains, visible yet utterly unreachable. And in the most primal versions, she enchanted a hawthorn bush, its branches weaving around him, pulling him into a slumber as deep as the earth itself. He is not dead, but sleeping, his consciousness trapped in a timeless dream. This is not a simple betrayal. It is a profound symbolic ending for a man who was never entirely of this world. His imprisonment represents the ultimate containment of raw, chaotic power. The wild prophet from the forest, the demon-born architect of a Christian kingdom, is finally put to rest not by an enemy, but by the civilized order of magic he helped to create. His eternal sleep connects him to a universal archetype, the undying sage. Across countless cultures, there are legends of great kings, prophets, and wizards who do not die, but wait in a hidden place for the hour of their people's greatest need. King Arthur himself is said to sleep in Avalon, ready to return when Britain calls. The Irish hero Fionn mac Cumhaill is believed to rest in a cave beneath Dublin, waiting to awaken. Merlin becomes part of this eternal cycle, a sleeping guardian of the land whose wisdom is not lost, merely held in reserve. His story ends not with a death, but with a question mark hanging over the entire world. Is he still there, dreaming of futures that may never come? Or is he simply a story we tell ourselves about the power we fear and the wisdom we hope is still out there, waiting in the silent, enchanted earth? Yet this sleeping wizard is tied to a very specific and rugged landscape far from the mythical Camelot. The Scottish borders hold a rival claim to his final resting place, a tradition that stubbornly preserves the memory of the original wild man. Deep within the Hermitage Forest, near the town of Melrose, local lore points to a small, unassuming stream called the Powsail Burn. Here, they say, Merlin lies buried beneath a hawthorn tree, his grave marked only by the whisper of the wind through the branches. This is not the grand tomb of a king's advisor, but the hidden end of a forest prophet. The place names themselves are a living archive. Just a few miles away, a hill bears the name Merlin's grave, and the surrounding area is dotted with ancient stones and sites that carry his memory. This Scottish tradition completely bypasses the polished court wizard. In these stories, he is forever Myrddin Wyllt, the madman who fled the battlefield and found his final solace among the Scottish hills. He never went to Camelot, never advised Arthur, and never built Stonehenge. He remained a creature of the wilderness until the very end. This alternate version of his death is hauntingly simple. After a long life of prophecy and sorrow, he simply lay down by the stream and fell into his eternal sleep, returning to the earth that had always been his true home. The persistence of this story in Scotland is a powerful reminder that the official legend, crafted by Geoffrey of Monmouth and his successors, never fully erased the older, more primal figure. In the quiet woods of the borders, the wild man still lives, his story etched not in parchment, but in the land itself. The great intellectual fires of the Renaissance began to burn, and the wizard Merlin underwent yet another transformation. The medieval world of chivalry and unquestioning faith was slowly giving way to an age of inquiry, of humanism, and a new fascination with the mechanics of the natural world. In this new climate, the old image of a demon-born sorcerer began to feel outdated, almost vulgar to the emerging class of scholars and gentlemen. They saw in Merlin a different kind of genius, one that could be reclaimed and repurposed. His magic was no longer framed as a gift from dark forces or even from God, but as a profound understanding of nature's hidden laws. He was reinvented as a master of natural philosophy, a proto-scientist whose enchantments were merely advanced applications of physics, mathematics, and astronomy. Think of the legend of Stonehenge, where he moves colossal stones with his ingenium, his clever devices. To a Renaissance scholar, this was not supernatural spellcasting. It was the work of a brilliant engineer who understood levers, pulleys, and the principles of counterweight better than any of his contemporaries. His prophecies were reinterpreted not as divine visions, but as the predictions of a supreme logician, a man who could calculate the outcomes of political and social forces with the precision of an astronomer charting the stars. This was a Merlin for the age of Leonardo da Vinci, a figure whose power came from knowledge, not from pacts with spirits. The wand was traded for a compass and an astrolabe. This shift was not merely a change of costume, it was a fundamental recasting of his character to fit a new, emerging worldview that placed human reason at the center of the universe. The wizard was being scrubbed clean of his medieval superstitions and presented as a rational hero for a new era. This intellectual makeover allowed his legend to survive and even thrive in a world that was becoming increasingly skeptical of miracles, but his journey through our collective imagination was far from over. The rational wizard of the Renaissance could not survive the cold logic of the Enlightenment. For nearly 2 centuries, Merlin faded from public view, dismissed as a silly superstition in an age of reason and industry. But a great pendulum was about to swing back. The 19th century arrived, and with it, a powerful yearning for everything the modern world had lost, a deep hunger for enchantment, for myth, and for the misty landscapes of a romanticized past. The Romantics and then the Victorians did not just rediscover Merlin, they re-enchanted him, weaving his legend into the very fabric of their national identity. At the heart of this revival stood one man, the poet laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson. His epic cycle of poems, The Idylls of the King, became the definitive Arthurian story for the Victorian era, and his portrayal of Merlin was tailored perfectly for its audience. Gone was the dangerous, demon-born trickster. Tennyson's Merlin is a grave, venerable sage, a pillar of moral authority and sober wisdom. He is the wise old counselor, a grandfatherly figure whose magic is less about spectacle and more about guiding the kingdom toward a noble, if ultimately tragic, destiny. Tennyson scrubbed the legend clean of its moral ambiguities, presenting Camelot as a shining model of Victorian virtue, a court built on chivalry, duty, and purity. In this meticulously ordered world, Merlin's role was to be the steady, guiding hand, a moral compass for the young king. His famous downfall is also softened, transformed from a tale of lust and betrayal into a more cautionary fable about the dangers of idle fascination. In the Idylls, his student Vivian uses not powerful magic, but persistent, flattering temptation to learn his secret of imprisonment. She preys not on his love, but on his pride and his weariness, coaxing the secret from him as a manipulative child might coax a secret from a tired old man. This was a fall that Victorians could understand, a lesson about the vulnerability of even the wisest man to the corrupting influence of a deceitful woman. Tennyson's version was a massive popular success, adorning drawing rooms and inspiring countless paintings. He had successfully repackaged the wild Celtic prophet as a respectable Victorian gentleman, ensuring that Merlin would not merely survive, but would flourish as he entered the most transformative stage of all, the birth of mass media. The legend of a wizard who moved mountains is a powerful one, but modern archaeology searches for the man who might have inspired it. Could a single historical figure be unearthed from beneath the layers of myth? The scholarly hunt for a real Merlin has not uncovered a tomb or a castle, but something far more compelling, a plausible scenario rooted in the chaotic century after the Romans abandoned Britain. In the power vacuum left by the legions, tribal warlords, Romanized British leaders, and pagan holy men all vied for control. Historians now suggest Merlin is not a single person, but a composite character, a memory of the powerful druids and bards who were the intellectual and spiritual leaders of their people. These were the advisors to kings, the keepers of law and genealogy, and the masters of an oral tradition that held the tribe's history and identity. When a kingdom faced a crisis, it was the bard who would recite the deeds of ancestral heroes to guide a king's decision, and it was the druid who would interpret omens and perform rituals to secure divine favor. Their profound knowledge made them seem like they could see the future, and their poetic words could feel like a form of magic. The original wild man, Myrddin Wyllt, could easily be based on such a figure, a tribal seer traumatized by the brutal warfare of the era, whose prophetic ravings were remembered and woven into local folklore. The name itself offers a tantalizing clue. Myrddin may be derived from the Roman town name Morrejunum, which later became Caerphilly or Carmarthen. This translates as the fort of Myrddin, suggesting a deep, localized origin for the figure long before Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote his history. So the search shifts from finding one man to understanding a cultural role, the vital function of the wise man, the prophet, and the storyteller in a society fighting for its survival. The wizard we know is the polished, literary version of this essential, ancient human figure, the advisor whose counsel felt so powerful it could only be explained as sorcery. The 20th century did not bury Merlin in a dusty tomb of forgotten lore. It gave him a new kind of immortality, projected onto the silver screen for millions to see. Perhaps the most influential version of all came from the magic of Disney animation. In 1963, The Sword in the Stone presented a Merlin who was less a demon-born prophet and more a delightful, bumbling, and brilliant uncle. This Merlin lives backwards in time, which explains his occasional forgetfulness and his knowledge of future inventions like the telephone. His magic is playful, used to turn the young Arthur, called Wart, into a fish or a squirrel for a lesson, not to orchestrate a king's conception through deception. The film emphasizes his role as a kindly, eccentric teacher, a wise mentor who imparts knowledge through whimsy. What it completely omits is any hint of his traumatic Welsh origins, his political machinations, or his terrifying demonic father. Disney scrubbed the character clean for a family audience, creating a grandfatherly wizard whose greatest conflict is a comic magical duel with the equally silly Madame Mim. This interpretation was so powerful and endearing that for generations it became the definitive Merlin, a far cry from the tormented wild man screaming prophecies in the forest. Other screen adaptations have since tried to reclaim those darker roots. The television series Merlin, which began in 2008, took a different approach by making its hero, a young man, appear to Arthur. This Merlin hides his magical abilities in a kingdom where they are outlawed, and his prophetic dreams are a source of fear and secrecy. This version reintroduces the idea of a destiny fraught with danger and the constant threat of discovery, tapping into the older legends of a power that must be concealed. Yet even here, the darker aspects of his conception are softened into a general, mythical old religion. The complex political prophecies and his role as a manipulative architect of the state are largely set aside in favor of a classic coming-of-age story and a focus on his loyal friendship with Arthur. These screen versions, from the comedic to the dramatic, consistently choose to focus on Merlin as a mentor and a magician. They embrace his wisdom and his power, but they almost universally sidestep the morally ambiguous, terrifying, and tragic figure from the deepest layers of the myth. The warlord's advisor who used illusion for royal adultery, the being born of a nightmare, the prophet whose visions were tools of political propaganda, these elements are too dark for most mainstream retellings. The screen has given us a sanitized wizard, a powerful and beloved figure, but one whose secret origins remain largely untold, waiting in the shadows just beyond the projector's light. Perhaps the deepest secret of Merlin's endurance is that he represents a part of ourselves. Modern psychology offers a powerful lens through which to view this ancient figure, seeing him not as a historical person, but as a profound symbol of the human unconscious mind. He embodies the raw, untamed wilderness of our own inner world, the deep well of intuition, dreams, and primal instincts that civilized life so often forces us to suppress. Think of his home, the dark and tangled Caledonian Forest. This is not just a physical location, it is a perfect metaphor for the unconscious itself, a place of shadow and mystery, teeming with strange creatures and hidden truths. His madness, the trauma that drove him from the battlefield, can be seen as a shattering of the conscious ego, a break that allowed these deeper, more chaotic forces to rise to the surface. His prophecies are not learned spells, but eruptions from this deep psychic well, messages from a part of the mind that operates beyond logic and reason. He is the wild voice we have been taught to ignore, the gut feeling we dismiss, the creative spark that seems to come from nowhere, and what is his ultimate role in the grand myth? He is the essential guide for the conscious mind, represented by the young King Arthur. Arthur is the ego, the part of us that must rule the kingdom of our daily lives, making decisions, upholding laws, and presenting an ordered face to the world. But no king can rule effectively if he is cut off from the wild wisdom of his own inner landscape. Merlin's task is to bridge that gap. He takes the raw boy, Wart, and through a series of transformative experiences turns him into a king. He does not teach him statecraft from a scroll. He turns him into a fish to understand the currents of power, a squirrel to learn the dynamics of fear and desire, a bird to gain the perspective of foresight. These are lessons from the unconscious, delivered not through lecture, but through embodied, symbolic experience. Arthur must integrate this wild wisdom to become a whole and effective ruler. He cannot build Camelot with conscious will alone. He needs the intuitive guidance, the prophetic dreams, and the deep, ancient knowledge that only his personal Merlin can provide. This is why the wizard's eventual disappearance or imprisonment feels so tragic. It represents a civilization that has become too rigid, too conscious, too cut off from its own intuitive roots. The kingdom falters when the connection to the wild, internal forest is lost. So when we ask if Merlin was real, we might be asking the wrong question. His reality is not in the soil of Wales or Scotland, but in the architecture of the human psyche. He is the eternal reminder that our greatest power does not always come from order and light, but sometimes from the whispered secrets of our own inner, enchanted dark. Merlin's most spectacular feats begin to make a startling new sense when we view them not as fantasy magic, but as the documented practices of Celtic seers. The raw, screaming prophecy of the original Myrddin Wyllt, for instance, mirrors the shamanic concept of Orn. This was not a calm, scholarly inspiration, but a divine and often violent torrent of poetic insight, a fury of spirit that was believed to come from the other world. A bard or a prophet in the grip of Orn was not composing a poem. He was a conduit for a power beyond himself, speaking truths he could not control. This state was frequently achieved through extreme methods, through fasting, through sleepless nights spent in the dark of a forest, or through sensory deprivation in a secluded cave. The wild man's madness in the Caledonian Forest fits this pattern perfectly. His trauma on the battlefield shattered his ordinary mind, leaving him open to this uncontrollable flow of prophetic vision. His ravings were not the nonsense of a lunatic, but the unfiltered awe of a shaman who had been broken open by the world. His communication with animals also shifts from a children's story to a core shamanic skill. In many indigenous traditions, the shaman's spirit can take the form of an animal, journeying as a wolf to gain cunning, or as a stag to understand the paths of the forest. When later legends say Merlin transformed Arthur into various creatures to teach him lessons, they are preserving a memory of this ancient spiritual pedagogy. The wizard was not performing party tricks. He was guiding the king's soul on a journey of initiation, using the oldest symbolic language humanity knows. Even his legendary ability to command the weather can be reinterpreted. The Druids were famously said to be able to summon storms and fog, not by waving wands, but through an intense collective focus of will and a deep understanding of natural omens, reading the flight of birds and the shapes of clouds to predict and seemingly to influence the elements themselves. This reframes Merlin's power from supernatural spellcasting to an ultimate mastery of the real world, a hyper-awareness of nature's patterns that would have seemed utterly magical to anyone else. His magic was not an escape from reality, but a profound immersion in its deepest, most hidden currents. But the story of Merlin's downfall is only one side of a very old tale. To see the whole picture, we must step out of the wizard's shadow and into the light of the woman who outsmarted him. For centuries, Nimue has been cast as the villainous, the treacherous student who betrayed her wise mentor. But what if we have been reading the story backwards all this time? Imagine a world where a brilliant young woman, possessing a rare and formidable talent for magic, finds herself under the tutelage of the most powerful being in Britain. At first, it is a dream. He shares secrets she could never have learned on her own, opening doors to realms of power she had only glimpsed in her dreams. But over time, the dream curdles. His mentorship becomes a cage. His infatuation transforms from flattery into a suffocating obsession. He does not see a future sorceress in her own right. He sees a possession, a final, beautiful addition to his collection of wonders. From this perspective, Nimue's actions look less like a betrayal and more like a brilliant, desperate jailbreak. She was a prisoner of his power and his affection, and she used the only key he had ever given her, the key to his own magical confinement, to secure her freedom. This was not the act of a malicious pupil. It was the calculated move of a person fighting for her own autonomy against a force that would not let her go. She realized that the only way to escape the architect of Camelot was to use his own blueprints against him. Her story is not one of treachery, but of a woman reclaiming her narrative from a man who believed he had written it for her. In the quiet that followed his imprisonment, a profound question was finally answered. Who holds the true power, the one who builds the cage or the one who learns its lock? This single prophecy of a returning king became a political and cultural force more powerful than any spell. The promise that Arthur was not dead, but only sleeping in Avalon, ready to return when his country needed him most, offered a template for hope that would be reused for 1,000 years. Whenever England or Britain faced a crisis, the legend of the once and future king was there, waiting to be revived. During the brutal Wars of the Roses, when rival noble houses tore the kingdom apart, both sides invoked the Arthurian myth to legitimize their claims, suggesting that their victory would be the long-awaited return of Arthur's golden age. Centuries later, when the Tudor dynasty took the throne, they leaned heavily into this symbolism. Henry VII even named his first-born son Arthur, a deliberate and powerful statement that his lineage was the fulfillment of Merlin's ancient prediction, bringing the prophecy full circle to bless a new royal house. The legend was not confined to royalty. For the common people, the idea of a sleeping king was a story of resilience, a belief that the nation's true, noble heart was merely dormant, not extinguished. It was a comfort during plague and famine, a whispered hope during foreign invasions, a spark of national pride that refused to be quenched. This is the ultimate purpose of Merlin's most famous prediction. It was never meant to be a literal forecast of a man rising from the grave. It was a psychological tool, a story designed to fortify a people's identity. It told them that their greatest strength was not lost to the past, but was preserved within the land itself, a sacred reserve of courage and justice to be drawn upon in times of darkness. The wizard's final, greatest magic was to embed this idea so deeply into the culture that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy, inspiring generations to act as if the king's return was possible, and in doing so to become the heroes their own hour demanded. This pattern of the wise, magical counselor is not unique to the misty hills of Britain. Across the world, in the frozen north and the deep Slavic forests, we find Merlin's spiritual cousins, figures who share his core attributes. The Norse god Odin is a striking parallel. He is not just a king of the gods, he is a seeker of forbidden knowledge. Odin sacrificed one of his own eyes in exchange for a drink from the well of wisdom, gaining profound insight into the past and future. He even hung himself from the world tree, Yggdrasil, for 9 days and nights, a self-inflicted trauma to unlock the secrets of the runes. This echoes Merlin's own prophetic frenzy, a power born not from comfort, but from immense personal sacrifice and a willingness to peer into the abyss. Both figures understand that true wisdom has a terrible price. Then there is Wyllt, the great Slavic god of the earth, magic, and the underworld. He is a shapeshifter, a master of illusions who often appears as a bear or a serpent, much like Merlin's own ability to wear any form. Wyllt is a guardian of ancient knowledge and a trickster who constantly challenges the rigid order of the sky god Perun. He represents the wild, untamed wisdom of the forest and the deep earth, a direct mirror to Merlin's original identity as Myrddin Wyllt, the wild man of the woods. These figures are not mere magicians, they are fundamental forces of chaos and creativity that balance the structured power of kings and gods. Look even further to the wise advisors of Eastern traditions. In Chinese lore, the sage Zhuge Liang from the Three Kingdoms period was a legendary strategist whose intellect seemed supernatural. He could predict the weather, devise brilliant military formations, and outthink his enemies with an almost prophetic foresight, earning him the posthumous title of the Crouching Dragon. His role as the indispensable counselor to the virtuous ruler Liu Bei is a clear echo of Merlin's relationship with Arthur. These recurring characters point to a deep, universal human need. Every culture, in its own way, tells the story of the wise guide, the supernatural counselor who stands just outside the circle of power. He is the one who possesses the dangerous knowledge the king cannot afford to have, but cannot afford to ignore. He bridges the gap between the human world and the mysterious forces that shape it, whether those forces are gods, spirits, or the raw patterns of nature itself. The wizard is an archetype, a fundamental piece of our collective storytelling, because he answers a timeless question. How does a leader navigate a world filled with unseen dangers and impossible choices? The answer has always been the same: he needs a Merlin. So after this long journey through time, Merlin remains an enigma wrapped in a legend. The investigation into his origins leaves us with profound, unanswered questions. First, and perhaps most tantalizing, is the question of the single man. Was there ever one historical Merlin, a specific druid or a battle-traumatized prophet whose memory sparked the myth? Or is he purely an archetype, a symbolic fusion of every wise man and wild seer who ever counseled a Celtic chieftain? We may never uncover a skeleton with a wizard's staff, and that mystery is part of his enduring power. Then we must ask why this particular story became the bedrock of British identity. In a land invaded by Romans, Saxons, and Normans, why did the tale of a wizard and his chosen king resonate so deeply? It seems the legend provided a crucial sense of continuity, a glorious and unbroken history for a people whose real past was fractured by conquest. Merlin's prophecies offered hope, a promise that native strength would ultimately prevail, a narrative that every new ruler could co-opt to legitimize their power. And finally, what is the true meaning of his entrapment? Was it a simple tragedy of a wise man brought low by love, or something far more significant? His imprisonment can be seen as the ultimate price of his power. The moment the chaotic, wild wisdom he represented had to be contained for the civilized order of Camelot to function, only for that same order to later crumble without his guidance. It is a paradox that lies at the heart of his story. We are left with a figure who is simultaneously a political tool, a psychological symbol, and a folk memory, his final secret being that he was never one thing at all, but a mirror reflecting our own endless search for wisdom, magic, and meaning in a world that often feels stripped of wonder. From a screaming prophet in the ancient woods to a grandfatherly wizard on the silver screen, Merlin's journey is one of constant reinvention. His true power was never just magic, but an extraordinary ability to transform, adapting to the deepest fears and highest hopes of every generation that told his tale. He has been a political weapon for kings, a holy sage for priests, a rational genius for scholars, and a kindly mentor for modern audiences. Each era looked into the legend and saw its own reflection, reshaping the wild man to fit its own ideals and anxieties. This endless metamorphosis is the real enchantment, a spell more powerful than any he ever cast. It proves that a story is never truly finished as long as it continues to hold meaning for us. If Merlin's story is still being written, what new secrets might we discover about him next? Perhaps the next chapter is yours to imagine. Share your own theories in the comments below.